Good morning, good afternoon, and hello to everybody. Thank you for coming in. We have got a lot going on today. Some familiar faces coming back with us. And just as a reminder, we're actually going to be, we're 2 weeks away now from Barcelona at this point. Going to be a lot of good programming going on there, registrations all the way through the roof. I think just about everybody decided to go out to Europe, but no surprise, Barcelona is absolutely gorgeous this time of year. We're going to give it just another couple minutes. It looks like we've got some folks settled coming in and settling in. Right now, we're going to have Tim Burkard with us, who I know those of you who are regulars here have heard him speak. He's got a bunch of sessions coming up in Barcelona. Be sure to mark down these session IDs. The content catalog is open, so you can go ahead and register for these sessions. Get yourself on, because I know a lot of those have sold out. Looking at my results here, some of these have already got a lot of folks in seats, so don't waste any time getting yourself in on that. This is absolutely going to sell out very quickly. Well, I think we are going to actually get going. Shirley, do we have you with us here today?
You sure do. Thank you so
Fantastic.
much.
No worries.
All right. Thank you so much for that great introduction, Andrew. So my name is Shirley Arteaga. I am the Senior Product Marketing Manager for Learning, and I am super, super excited to be here with two VMware VCF instructor legends, Joel West and Tim Burkard, as they discuss our latest vSphere Cloud Foundation Administrator, as well as the VMware Cloud Foundation Administrator certifications that just launched in Las Vegas. And they're here. They will share some valuable insights. So I am old school. So I have your notebooks out, notepads out, and without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to them. Rachel and I will be in the Q&A to answer any questions. So please feel free to ask away. Go ahead, Tim and Joel.
So my name's Tim Burkard. I am, as Andrew so kindly introduced, I am going to be in Barcelona and going to be doing a few presentations, a couple of Meet the Experts sessions also that are now available in the catalog. And my days are pretty well booked. Some of my nights are booked already too, which is pretty scary. But I'm here to discuss with Joel. Really, I'm just supporting Joel because he's the man. He is Mr. Full Stack. He is the whiteboard wizard. And I am just privileged to share this opportunity being with Joel in our webinar here.
All right. Thanks, Tim. So my name is Joel West, and Tim and I work together on the VCF learning team to deal with everything involving, as Tim said, the full stack of solutions. All right. So we want to talk, first of all, just how we create certifications. The whole point around this is just so that you can get some ideas of positioning and maybe how deep to go on certain exams. Then we'll break down the new VVF exam. So VVF meaning more vSphere based in our solutions, not really including all the components that would be included in VMware Cloud Foundation. And then we'll differentiate between those two as we go. All right, so let's talk about how we create certification. So the first thing is we decide what level of knowledge that we want to cover for any particular test taker. So this is usually what we call the minimally acceptable candidate. And it's important to know this because particularly something like VCF, and this is the minimally acceptable candidate list for VCF, but any VMware exam that you would be taking for certification has this exact same kind of description. They're all going to vary a little bit, of course, but it's the same idea. So if I say install, configure, maintain, we're talking about some level of administration. You notice that it's not really design in there. So we're not looking for you to be an architect or anything like that, but we do expect you to be able to administrate and perform those day-to-day operations. And then perform day-to-day operations on what? So then we'll list out components. So all the components that make up a VMware Cloud Foundation instance, which is pretty much every product that we have in the stack. And then day to day, what kinds of things do we expect you to do? Moving around workloads, and this is just a little bit broader concept. And if you've been a vSphere administrator, we're just looking at the fact that we have different structures in place. We'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the VCF exam in a minute. Automation. So particularly in VMware Cloud Foundation, automation is huge. And then how to monitor. All right, so this is one of the bigger things that we're starting to test on. Because you have access to the ARIA suite, you have access now to tools that will help you be very proactive. So again, we'll stress this a couple of times. We're not looking for someone to do like an internal support level of troubleshooting. We're saying, can you look at the output of some of these tools and sort of figure out what the next step is? And then business continuity and disaster recovery, that's always a part of every discussion. But really here, it's just what capabilities inside of VCF would give me those tools. And then particularly for something, because there's so many components, NSX being one of those. NSX is a topic in and of itself, just like vSphere is. But we really are just looking at the basics of networking. So do you understand how to support those basic networking functions? And then could you deploy and administer this on premises? Because that's sort of the primary go-to today is on-premises solution. Not to say that we couldn't run the same framework on a cloud provider, but that's not the emphasis. It's more on the on-premises, which is what our focus is with most customers today. All right. Miss anything on that, Tim, or did I get it
You
right?
know, I was thinking that we were first starting off with VVF, and that seemed like the minimally acceptable candidate for VVF, and it said VC, but I think it was meant to be VVF. Other than that, no. You know, the qualified candidate isn't going to be troubleshooting at the level, as you just said, troubleshooting at the level of professional services, for example, or global services, or an integrator. But they're going to be able to know when they have to call for that. And so they've got to be able to do the base level of troubleshooting themselves. And that is what we wrote our test questions as, not as somebody that was going to be in global services.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that I think the thing was that was just an example of a minimally acceptable candidate. So yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, exactly. All right. And then and we put a few things in here just in case you're not new to VMware certification. So if you've been involved in this in the past, maybe you haven't done a certification in a while and you're looking to just update, there have been two changes. The first change is we used to have a 7-section framework. We've now moved to this 5-section framework. So again, these are the top level objectives that could potentially be on the exam, but not every exam will contain every section. We'll talk about those as we get to the 2 specific exams that we're going to cover today. And then one other thing is
I was just going to say, if you're working and you're actually reading the slide, it says all certification exams,
right,
are based on the same framework. So
right.
as we move through the slides, you're going to see that, in fact, this particular exams we're talking about do not have all 5 sections. So it says that right in the slide, but it's kind of like one of those things that you want to reiterate. So I reiterated.
Yeah, no problem. And then again, if you're new to certification, this doesn't make any difference because it's what's the objective today. But if you did VMware certifications in the past, if you were brand new to certification, starting your certification path, or if you let it lapse, which again is not a thing today because certifications don't expire, they're version specific, course completion is no longer required. So you can just jump in there and take the test. The difference is, though, without having taken a course, it's pretty difficult to understand what kind of objectives that we target, because in the training, the lecture material, and in particular the lab content, are focused usually around the level of the objective. So if you don't take training, you just have to really rely on being able to figure out what some of this means. And we are going to spend some time today trying to decipher a little bit of that on both of these exams. All right, so we'll start off with the new VMware Certified Professional for VMware vSphere Foundation Administrator 2024. So 2 acronyms you're probably starting to see a lot are VVF and VCF. So VCF is not new. We've been pushing that for years. That's VMware Cloud Foundation. VVF is simply a vSphere base. So we're not really utilizing the full stack. This would equate to just a basic vSphere environment that we've had for many, many years. All right, so here's the new badge. So just give everybody kind of a visual of what badges that you'll get. And as far as the solution knowledge, we expect you to be able to identify the components and where and how they're used. So this is always kind of an important part of the exam, because even if you don't get a specific question on identifying a feature, how they fit together is really critical in being able to answer a lot of these questions. Because if I say install and configure and manage the solution, and again, if I'm looking at VVF, we're only looking at a subset of everything that's available in the VMware stack. And we'll talk a little bit about that when I get to some of the objectives in a minute about what components that we're talking about. So understanding how they fit together, what use cases are used for what business requirements that you might present, and how we need to deploy those. And then there's always a little bit of troubleshooting. So I'll mention this too, moving forward with the kind of this new phase of exams certification, it always also mirrors our training. So we have training on administering products, and we have training on troubleshooting. So those 2 concepts will be covered by these administration exams. There will be design exams coming, right? And that's a deeper level of knowledge. That's not, do you know where to go to and what UI or what command line do you need to be able to know to troubleshoot something or configure something? It's, do you understand the design concept? So it's a much higher level. So we refer to that as architect. So everything in here is going to be focused on administration, with the set 1 or 2 exceptions I'm going to talk to you about. And then later on, there'll be exams around the design concepts, which again is a completely different level of exam. And if you've taken that either in VMware or other vendors, you're aware of that. It's not what the day-to-day is, it's how to design and scale things. All right, so as Tim said, not every section is in every exam. So for this VVF, there's nothing around just the basics, which is section 1. If we were to have a lower level exam, so again, if you're not new to VMware certification, you may be aware of the old associate exams. That's kind of the level that we would attack in that kind of exam. Do you just understand the product names and what those products do? So we are testing on this VMware solution. So again, that's the objective we looked at the very top there. What are the components? How do they fit together? There are no design objectives, which makes sense. This is not a design exam. But then section 4, as you could guess, is going to be the most heavily tested on around installing, configuring, and administering a VMware solution in the VVF context. And then finally, the troubleshooting. And Tim and I've already mentioned twice, but we'll mention it again, to just not over-rotate on this. It is basic troubleshooting, and again, interpreting the kinds of messages that you're getting in the UI. So if I get some kind of health check and I get a message back from that, what does this mean, and what kind of troubleshooting can I do as a first level before I open that support case? Because many times you can fix it yourself. It might be something fairly simple, but then also to understand when to move on to a support case as well.
Now, I don't want to be real specific here, but as far as getting ready for the exam, section 4, it's probably 60% of the test. I mean, it's huge. The section 2, maybe 10 or 20. Section 5, maybe 10 or 20. But the bulk of the exam on an administration exam like this is in section 4: install, configure, administrate. That's in getting ready. That's where your meat is, so to speak.
That's right. And for these administration exams, we would kind of expect that as well. So That's definitely fair. All right, so I'm just going to quickly break down some of the objectives, and we'll give some tips and things along the way as well. So section 2, identify and describe the VVF components and architecture. And then section 2.2 is describe the requirements for implementing that same list of components. And then objective 2.3 is to identify and describe various use cases. So what we're really talking about here, and when it says these components, is ESXi, vSphere, vSphere with Tanzu, vSAN, sorry, and then the ARIA components. Now, again, ARIA is typically automatically something that is included with the VCF solution package. So, but with VVF, it is something that could be utilized. And the reason that that's being brought in is, again, these are, purpose-built products to help you with monitoring and troubleshooting and scaling and, looking at things proactively rather than reactively. And the whole point is you do need these day 2+ tools. You could go out, buy a third party, but it's inclusive with a lot of the different licenses, or it can be added on. It's going to be more cost effective, but the main thing here is that you are going to be saving tons of time with being able to go in and troubleshoot something quickly and sort of out of the box, right? Because let's say something like ARIA for logs. And again, these are going to be rebranded with VMware Cloud Foundation logs. The ARIA name will probably fade away, particularly by the time we get to version 9. So we're looking at the components for operations, the components for logs, the components for lifecycle, components for networking. They have pre-configured filters in there that you can start with out of the box. So can you go in and look at those basic components and be able to do that? So we'll give some study tips along the way here. First study tip is, can you explain the function of every one of these products in the vSphere stack? So everything that I mentioned there. You don't have to memorize or write down what I said, because it is in the exam blueprint.
Now, I want to jump in here, Joel, and just look at the verbs that the objectives have in them. Identify and describe. Describe the requirements. Identify and describe. This section of the exam is more about knowing what the parts are, knowing what it is. If a question says something about an analysis of the logs, well, you would probably jump right to the fact that VCF operations for logs is probably what we're looking for. And can you identify and describe what VCF operations for logs does? That's what the section is about. It's not where would you click. As Joel, as you mentioned earlier, this in the architecture exam. Well, in this section, it's not about where would you click. What are the parameters that you're building on? This is just having that overall knowledge of what the VMware vSphere Foundation is made up of. So identify and describe. Identify and describe. It doesn't say do anything. I just feel like that's an important component of section 2.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so the next section is section 4, and as Tim said, this is going to be the major part of the exam. So objective 4.1, can you install these components? Objective 4.2, can you perform some day 2 operations? Now let's I'll give you a couple of quick examples of that. Once we get everything stood up, you're typically going to have a business objective particularly around security and the role-based access to this environment. So that generally means setting up an identity source. So if you're using the identity management from VMware, or if you're using something else, or if you're using the built-in SSO, which tool are you going to use, and then figuring out what roles are relevant to us and then assigning those roles and permissions to the appropriate users and groups. So that's an example of the day 2 operations. Managing the lifecycle of a VM in Objective 4.3. If you have vSphere experience, this is just what are we doing day to day with a VM. And then 4.4, configuring vSphere networking components. So this, again, when we're talking about VVF, we're not talking about NSX. We're just talking about good old school vSphere networking, distributed switches, and configuring VLANs or ports, whatever that might be. And then 4.5 is configuring content libraries. So again, that's building storage resources for the lifecycle management and other things. And then along with 4.6, configuring vSphere storage components. So again, if you have been administering vSphere for quite some time, this is just the same old things that we've been having. And a vSphere very closely mirrors the VCP that we had for data center virtualization in the past.
Right. Again, I'll jump in and just remind everybody that you're looking at virtual machines and storage and distributed port groups and standard port groups and things that you have done. Those of you that have taken these exams, you've done this before. VVF is much more closely related to the VCP for DCV than VCF is going to be, and so that's a difference in the 2 exams that we're talking about today. Just wanted to share my thoughts when my thoughts hit my brain. That's kind of what I do, Joel.
You got to say it when it comes up.
Otherwise, I'll forget and I won't mention it.
And then the last few in section 4 are just managing ESXi hosts, securing workloads. Again, how are we configuring encryption? Do you understand about how data is handled in a vSphere environment? And then 4.9 is just managing vSAN, because again, everybody uses vSAN in some form or another. If they're looking at programmatic management of storage, some people don't use vSAN, but we feel that it's important to at least understand these capabilities. So there are going to be vSAN questions pretty much on any VMware certification. So, and as Tim said, this is all about doing. So if you're not familiar with everything that we just talked about in this list, or maybe you're new, right? You're just new to vSphere, or you need to review it. Maybe I did it in a previous job, but I haven't touched it in a while. You need to get some hands-on experience with this. So utilize the resources that you have on hand, which is hands-on labs. There's tons of labs you can work out there, and many of them map directly to the exam objectives. So there's vSAN labs out there. You could work those vSAN labs, and they're going to touch on all these objective points that are here in the exam blueprint.
I have to jump in again and just say that HOL has a 4-letter word that starts with F associated with it. Now, it happens to be my favorite 4-letter word that starts with F. Now, I know what you're thinking, and that's probably funding. And it's not. It's close, though. It's free. Free. Labs can cost a lot of money to build, but our hands-on labs give you that lab experience at no cost. So by all means, you can play, you can learn, you can build your knowledge base with hands-on labs. It will get you there from here.
Yeah, and labs are getting more and more expensive to build and maintain, so it's great that we have free resources like this. All right, and then the last objective on the VVF, and then we'll transition over to the VCF exam, is again just read through these exam objectives and think about how I would attack this at an administration level. So can you diagnose and identify technical issues? Again, I'm going to get messages right in the UI. We're all familiar with that. Can you sort of from a first point of triage kind of decipher that message and figure out what 2 or 3 things are that you might try to resolve that? And again, these are typically going to be the things that everyone is familiar with. So the same thing would be around vSAN, networking, and even the ARIA components. So the ARIA components, that one probably has overall on the exam maybe 1 or 2 questions on it because, again, we don't test a lot on ARIA components. On this exam, there'll be more so on the VCF, but it would be something simple like, what product would I use to filter out information that I might be getting from a vSphere issue, right? And that would be obviously ARIA for logs, just an example of kind of the scope of those. And we, like I said, I told you we reiterate this one more time. We're not expecting you to have, professional services level of troubleshooting. And I just put two examples here. So could I interpret a vSAN health score and try to figure out what the problem is? Because again, those are things that are typically you're going to have to fix physically in your data center. It might be a capacity issue. It might be an issue with one of the hosts, and figure out kind of what that first line is, or resolving certificate issues. So day-to-day things we have to deal with, password management, certificate management. Do I know the first steps to go in and look for what the problem might be if something didn't renew, or particularly if we just performed a certificate operation, what might the problem be? All right. So let's move on now. Go ahead. Go for it.
Good one, Joel. Good one.
All right. So let's talk about the VMware Cloud Foundation Administrator. So these exam objectives are going to be, there's quite a few more of them because obviously there's quite a few more components. So I want to give you some tips and tricks, and Tim and I have talked quite a bit about this. We've done some of these certification overviews at conferences. And just based on feedback from everybody, we took a little bit of a different approach this time. So this is just to kind of help you target what you're trying to study. So as far as this sort of marketing slide that we had for the foundation, for the VVF exam, it's not really much different. We just substituted the vSphere Foundation with VMware Cloud Foundation. So again, the difference here is that there's a much larger list of products. So I have to understand how to install and configure and make a much larger list of components work. And then there's going to be more troubleshooting. So not any further depth, but just troubleshooting of more components. Okay?
A lot broader.
That's right.
Yeah, a lot broader.
That's right. It's like you're standing on the beach and you can see the horizon as far as you can in either direction, but you're only knee deep. So it's a lot of stuff, but knee deep.
Yep.
All right. Cool thing is section 1 and 3 are omitted, right? So we're not asking you anything basic, and we are not asking any design questions. I will mention one thing right here. You may get 1 or 2 design questions, and if you do, they will be specifically around vSAN. In any exam, there are always some test questions on there that you are not graded on. So because we don't have the architecture exam yet, we're trying to get a feel for the right level set. So there are going to be maybe 2 or 3 design questions on there. I'll give you another big secret. I just told you that every question isn't scored. If you get to a design question and you're like, I have no idea what this is asking me, just mark it for review. Move on, and those are the 2 or 3 things that you're going to come back to after you've answered successfully all the things that you can get right. Then you come back and you do some swag theory on these questions that you might not understand.
Yeah. I was just going to say, throw a wild guess in there.
Yeah, that's right.
Because even if it's not marked, you still don't want to leave it blank.
Right.
And that's just test taking 101. You don't leave anything blank. Even if I'm going to mark it for review later, I'll typically go in and go ahead and just take the first thought.
Yeah.
It might be right, but I just take the first thought and think, I think it's that, but I'm going to come back to this one and review it. But I'm going to have an answer in there because the doggone tests are timed.
That's right.
And if the clock runs out and you've left questions marked without an answer in it, well, they're that's not good. So throw your first thought in, come back and review it and give it more depth if there's time.
That's right. Yeah, gut reaction is always the best. And
true.
I I think I've taken something like over 200 certification exams, and I'm a very poor test taker, and I've at least learned a few things over the years. All right, so let's go over a few things here. So again, this VMware solution list, you notice that the action word is the same.
Yep.
It's identify. So all that really means is, do I understand this longer list of components? So it's everything in vSphere that we just discussed, plus things like NSX, and then the VMware Cloud Foundation components. So that would be things like SDDC Manager, right? And that list. So if you bring up the exam blueprint, it will give you some examples of all this. And again, it will be literally anything that is on the table for a VMware solution, because those are all potential parts of VCF. So we mentioned the focus on private cloud. So we're really looking at this as an on-premises solution. Again, this, if you decide to go hybrid, this same framework can run on all of our cloud partners. So the way that you administrate it is all the same. How it gets deployed might be slightly different because there's a different underlay, but even that kind of becomes obfuscated at the end of the day. So just understand that we're really kind of focused on premises. Where that comes into play is when we start talking about scaling, because you're the one that's going to be responsible for scaling things versus the service provider, if you had that kind of service. So identify ARIA components. This IIS control plane, again, that's formerly vSphere with Tanzu, so some things have some new names. The main difference here with vSphere with Tanzu is that you have the capability, whether it's VVF or VCF, to give your DevOps team enabled resources for modern applications very, very easily, because it's native now into the UI. So if I'm an administrator and I don't know anything about DevOps, I can enable resources for Tanzu by simply clicking through the workflow that's in the UI and then hand it over to the DevOps team that then knows what to do. So a lot of what's being built into the solution today is to help you as an administrator enable things that you technically are not an expert on, because it's a different kind of skill set. But I can provide the resources because that is my job, is to provide those kinds of things.
You mentioned Joel. Sorry, you mentioned that things are named differently, and it says the VMware ARIA suite, which that name is going away, and it's going to say something like VMware Cloud Foundation Network Operations, which has only gone through. I've only been here 10 years, and that thing's only been with us about 5 years. But this is its third or fourth name. It's the artist formerly known as Vernie. And,
Right.
it's now sitting there as that. So
That's right.
Just wanted to chime in.
Oh yeah, no problem. The one thing that might be a little bit new to everybody is this data services manager. So that is fairly new. So the whole idea here is that if you want to do data services management, it is a capability, and it's an appliance that you're deploying. And the whole part about this is that, a lot of studies have been done, polling of customers, and when you're looking at workloads, roughly at least 25 to 35%. Of course, it's always a little bit loose because of the number of responses that you get, but a high percentage of the workloads that are running things that generate revenue for us, utilize these data services. So this is a whole management component, if you want to look at it that way, that is providing hardened databases to where you can have a choice between Postgres, MySQL, and then I think Tech Preview is the Google Alloy database. And the whole part is that I have something pre-configured that snaps into automation. So what this helps is speeds up the DevOps team, because we've already got something that has full API support, which is what they're using when they're doing all of their automated deployment. But it basically gives us a certified database that could be snapped into these applications that they're building that run these data services. So you won't get, certainly kind of lab-based questions too much on that. It's just understanding what that is. And you can pull up the documentation, just kind of read through that and get familiar with what I just kind of gave with you.
Yeah,
And
again,
then,
it's identify the use cases. So
That's
you,
right.
you need to be familiar with that, just like Objective 2.6.
Yeah.
You need to be familiar with the add-ons that are available. They're integrated solutions, and I'm jumping ahead because of who I am.
Yeah.
The number one, to me, the number one add-on that anybody looking at VCF is going to be vDefend firewall services. And so what are the use cases for vDefend firewall services, whether it's gateway firewall, distributed firewall, whatever vDefend is giving, including Avi. And those are, sorry, that's where my background is. So I'm jumping in and jumping ahead of you there, Joel. Sorry about that.
No worries, man.
But that's where, that's where, okay, what am I going to use to secure my east-west environment? Well, it happens to be an add-on, but it's still available and integrated fully and completely with VMware Cloud Foundation. So we need to be aware and be able to identify when those use cases are going to be put into place.
Right. Awesome. So our little tip here is to be able to explain to your boss and or your grandmother what this cloud operational model is all about. So the whole thing is, we make a joke about it, but just be conversant in these things and be able to explain to people why
Perfect.
this cloud operational model is important. All right, so let's look at section 4. Now, section 4 is a monster.
Oh, no, not section 4.
In any administration exam, right, section 4 is going to be the biggie, but this has a ton of objectives in it. So I want to give you a few tips with this because it seems like it's almost causes panic when you look at the number of objectives. I think there's 24 total objectives in this section.
Did you hear my voice, Joel? Did you hear my voice? I was throwing panic out there.
I know. But you can group them together, right? So if you think about like objectives 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3, it's really part of the same process. So bring up is the initial build out of my management domain, which is my very first domain that creates a VCF instance. So deploying and configuring the management domain and this initial edge cluster. So the edge cluster in the management domain is basically your think about your top end routing function in VCF. So these two edge routers give you a separation between the VCF instance or your virtualized part of the world and who they're peering with in the data center. So these are typically physical routers that they're peering with that gives you that north-south connectivity in and out of the VCF environment. So this is kind of your gateway, or like I said, you can just think about that control point or the routing point between the VCF environment and your, say, top rack switches or wherever else you're peering with. So like I said, as you look to those 24, think about how you can group these. So the next one, same idea. And the next chunk is pretty large, right? But you can group these. So it's 4.11 through 4.22. So for 4.11, given a scenario, can you scale a VMware Cloud Foundation deployment? So basically what this means is, if I wanted to build a new workload domain, or if I wanted to scale an existing workload domain, can I give you those steps in order? Now, pretty much most of the objectives in 4.11 through 4.22 are a breakdown of that. So that's why you can group these together, because all of these objectives start with, given a scenario, do this, right? Do things like, can you deploy or can you deploy storage policies? Can you configure storage policies? Do you know how to prepare new hosts to be instantiated or to be commissioned into VMware Cloud Foundation? So again, it'll just go through this. And again, these are all day 2. Everything's all stood up. Everything's good, but as we would expect, you're moving everything that you had existing into VCF to get everything in the same environment. And so as you do that, you're going to have to go and configure these resources. And again, as we've said multiple times, this is do this, right? That's the key word. So to get practice with that, go back to hands-on lab. So if you don't have, a test lab where you work, or even if you do, what's nice about hands-on labs is you can go in there and just experiment. And if it blows up, right, you just close that lab and open up another one. That's what I love about it. And it's too hard to memorize all this, right? This is too many actions to memorize. So use hands-on labs because that's what's going to really give you the knowledge transfer. And you don't have to memorize it because you're going to know it.
The other thing about hands-on labs, guys, is when you start up a lab, it's good for I don't know if it's an hour and a half or 2 hours or something. You can extend it, but you can't extend it past the day. So don't expect to do all this configuration on Tuesday and Wednesday go back to do the troubleshooting or whatever. That doesn't work that way. So, plan your time accordingly for getting the best use out of hands-on labs.
All right, now section 5 is troubleshooting. So the troubleshooting here is going to be a little different just because, again, it's more components. All right, so I want to just bring up the tip here because think about how these relate together. So 5.1 and 5.3 are pretty straightforward, right? Given a scenario, be able to go in and figure out what the problem is. I just made a little joke here. What could possibly go wrong with bring up? Well, if you start opening the documentation, or if you watch any of the on demand, or if you take any of the training, we talk about this. There's some bring up is pretty foolproof, but there are some things that you can make some poor choices on, and that's what we cover here. So pretty straightforward. But I also wanted to mention about 5.2 because that seems a little ominous. Diagnose and identify technical issues related to VMware Cloud Foundation. What does that mean? Technical issues. Well, again, the objective may not be stated as clearly as it needs to. We continue to morph and fix these things, and it's hard to put it in print sometimes exactly what we mean. But what this is really saying is, if we listed what the tools might be in, say, section 2, so we listed something like serviceability option, which is SOS. It's a command line tool that gives you tabular output. So if you've ever done something command line, it just spits out 4 billion lines of logs. That doesn't mean anything. This gives you a really nice tabular output in the command line. And so in section 2, maybe we asked you what it was. In section 5, we might say, well, why would you use this and what kinds of options might be available? So that's kind of the difference. All right, and then the last 3 here, 5.4, 5.5, and 5.6 are just, again, troubleshooting tasks for what we would say basic vSphere. So the reason we separated these, the first 3 objectives were specific to VCF. The last 3 are specific to vSphere because, again, at the end of the day, it's still vSphere that is providing the resources to my VCF instance. And again, any time that we talk about troubleshooting some of the other components, especially something like NSX, it's going to be pretty straightforward because, there are, again, full classes and other things on NSX, which is, again, kind of a component in of itself, particularly if we use everything, which Tim mentioned the VDefend, which we use really the most used feature of NSX was security components. We're not asking you that. Like I said, be able to understand and talk through the purpose of the edge and that north-south, and of course, just routing my east-west networks in a component. All right, pretty straight.
And the overlay, layer 2 overlay, and TEPs and things of that nature that are inherent, but it is part of vSphere networking because it has to be built upon a distributed switch. And so if you're coming at this after years of vSphere, and you VCP and DCV and distributed switches backwards and forwards, that's important for getting into VCF networking. But now we're going to add a little slight component, and something that you'd not heard of prior is a TEP and the overlay networking, which creates a segment, which if I simplify that, it's just another distributed port group, but that, that's a good way to understand it, but it might not be the way it's asked in the test. So you have to have a full understanding of that portion of NSX.
Right. And I think that's a big thing too, is that once we do add NSX into the picture, there's some different terminology that we need to be familiar with. And once I think you understand the components, it helps a lot towards answering these questions for sure.
That's what I just sort of did, didn't I?
I did. And you said it perfectly. You said it perfectly. All right. And then these are, I would say, a little bit more advanced. So like the objectives 5.1 through 5.3 were just troubleshooting initial bring up and deployment. 5.7 and 5.8 are, again, this is day 2+. What kind of things would I expect to see in the SDDC Manager UI? So again, it's just some familiarity with the interface. And again, it's time and seat on all the stuff. And then utilizing ARIA to do some troubleshooting tasks. So as Tim said, this is all going to be the VMware Cloud Foundation, and then fill in the blank with whatever the solution is. So just some really basic familiarity with ARIA. There's ARIA labs out there on Hands-On Labs. Certainly would fully recommend that you go through and run through those as well.
Operations is critical, and ARIA ops or VROPS in the old days. That's a component for monitoring purposes. And how are you reading that? How you read that component? So familiarity there is pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So if you're still with us, that was a lot of information in a short amount of time. But from my point, I just hope that that's helped with trying to decipher, kind of what the objectives mean. So that's, you got to spend a lot of time on your own, obviously studying this stuff, but understanding the scope and the direction of the objectives, I think is critical.
Well, I agree with you 100%. I've taken a few exams in my life, maybe not 200 like you, Joel, but I've taken well over 100 certification exams. And I don't mean to pat myself too much on the back, but I'm a pretty good test taker. I've as you said, you learn some things after taking a number of these exams. I learned that I am always nervous, always. I don't care if I have really studied or if I'm going in and haven't studied that well, and I'm just going in to take a shot for the heck of it. I've done that. And I still sit down and get sweaty palms. I'm just, that's the nature of the beast. Reading the questions. Oh my gosh, if I had to teach myself that. Read the whole question. Every word is important. And I'm jumping to conclusions. I also love to read the answers before I read the question. I want to see what they're looking for. I want to see, and then when you read, it's almost self-evident a lot of times, but you still need to read the entire question because it might say what's not there at the end. We try to avoid those in our test building exercises right now. We're stopping the idea of asking negative questions.
Mm-hmm.
What's not a part of VMware Cloud Foundation? We don't ask those anymore, and so be really careful. I like to read my answers and then read the question because a lot of times it becomes very self-evident. But read the whole question anyway.
Right.
Read the whole answer anyway. Okay, that's kind of important. So, yeah.
All righty. So we had a bunch of questions come into the chat, and I want to go through a couple of them. I know we only have 4 minutes, but we are open to staying on a little bit later if you all are open to staying on a little later and keep this party going. Okay, so let's get started. Let's talk to the first question. So what is the difference between VVF and VCF?
V and C.
I like it.
Well, I think we addressed that, Joel. I'll say something here, but
Yeah.
I think we addressed it in the conversation that the VVF is pretty much it's VMware vSphere Foundation, and it's pretty much focused on vSphere and the few components that are tied together with it. But its focus is primarily the standard or enterprise level of vSphere, vCenter, ESXi, a little bit of vSAN, but a little bit of VROPS, but it's pretty much vSphere. And VCF, that's the full stack. That's all these components interacting and built to work with each other and in concert with one another. And so as far as the exam is concerned, VVF will be very vSphere focused. VCF will be very component focused. One thing that we've internally talked about is, the VVF will probably talk about, life cycle of virtual machines, what the virtual machines work and snapshots and things like that. VCF probably is hardly going to talk about a virtual machine. We're going to be talking more about the infrastructure it's used to handle those virtual machines rather than the virtual machines themselves.
That's right.
That might be the verbose answer to what's the difference between V and C.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so I'm going to combine another question. It is, should I take the VVF before taking the VCF? I got a lot of questions on that. They're a little confused on, is there a segue, or can you do one or the other separately?
Okay, I can take that one. So my recommendation would be this: if you're brand new to VMware solutions, I probably would start with the VVF because it's a smaller subset of the components. And if you're new to VMware solutions, you've got to start off with that vSphere base. So that allows you a nice milestone. So even if you're going to be a VCF customer, you still need to have that knowledge base. And it might be, a lot to just go from 0 to VCF. VVF will kind of give you an intermediate milestone. And then you could go on and take the VCF exam later, which would just add on to what you have. So that's maybe one way of looking at it. And then the other way is just pretty cut and dry. If you're only going to be a VVF customer, take the VVF certification. If you have vSphere experience and you're going to be a VCF customer, then maybe take the VCF certification. So they don't, there's a subset of information, but as Tim said, you're going to get a lot more questions on basic VM management in the VVF, and that's going to just be assumed knowledge in the VCF. So it's not a requirement either way. It's just more a scope of what's on the exam.
Okay,
One is
perfect.
not a prerequisite of the other.
That's right. That's right.
You don't have to do those in order. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Perfect. And then what are the courses that you recommend for both for the VCF and then the VVF one?
Well, I'll jump in there. You look for on-demand course with Joel West, who teaches VMware Cloud Foundation version 5.2, and he does it in tremendous format. That'll give you a really good overview for VCF. Mm-hmm. If you need to have a deeper dive into any of the particular components, Brian Watrous has done a phenomenal job with on-demands for the entire ARIA suite. I've done some NSX stuff. Joe Cooper has done some vSphere stuff. Linus has done some vSAN stuff and some cloud. What's it called? Tanzu and cloud. Mark Allenbaugh. All of our group, the group that we work with, has put a lot of video recordings, on-demand recordings. Now, because we're the learning team, we also offer live online instruction and in-person instruction. And depending on where you're sitting in your plan, if VVF is a thing, you probably really need to focus on a VMware ICM type course to get yourself up to speed. Otherwise, you try to find Mr. Full Stack in a class and sit the VCF.
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. So we've got one more question. So how deep into the components, so like NSX, vSAN, will I have to be going through to pass this VCF exam?
Joel said earlier, up to your knees.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, so you need to be able absolutely to understand how the components work together, how to deploy them, and how to do administration. What you are not going to be asked are questions that are design and, again, deep level troubleshooting. Those deep level troubleshooting, there usually are specialist exams around products that cover that. Just know the basic troubleshooting and then know when you need to call for help.
Okay, perfect. Alrighty, so that was all the questions we had. I just want to thank you, Tim and Joel. It's been a great hour. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I know that we've shared a lot of links in the chat, and we will be sending out an email in about 24 hours with the recording and links to everything that we've shared today. Remember, for the latest updates, the blogs, and words from our instructors, please follow us on VCF Learning, LinkedIn, and X. And Tim is looking forward to seeing you all back at Explore in Barcelona. So back to you, Anders.
All righty. Thanks again, folks. And as Simon mentioned, we will have the recording out to everybody who attended today so that you can follow up and share with friends. And we look forward to seeing you all soon. So thanks again.